I want to talk to you about something you should stop doing if you want your win rate to grow immediately. And this is not just a mistake recreational players are making. I think this is one of the biggest leaks in most cash game poker pros games. I'm going to show you what to stop doing. I'm going to show you how to fix it. And I'm going to show you why this mistake is costing you so much money. For context, my name is Marc Goone. I've made over 7 figures playing cash games, and I make these videos to help you climb past low stakes. So hopefully one day you can join us at Hungry Horse Poker, where we can help you crush mid to high stakes and beyond. All right. So what is the mistake? If your most common bet size is somewhere between 1/2 pot to pot, you are most likely lighting money on fire. I would say over 80% of the time in live poker, the most profitable size is either going to be very large or very small. Yet the most common size I see used is somewhere in between. I'm going to show you why this should mostly be eliminated from your game, and then I'll show you 2 exceptions where the medium bet size can be used sparingly. We'll start with the flop. Let's jump in. All right, so we are playing 2-5 with all the bulbous boys. Villain in the cutoff opens to 20. We are on the button with pocket 9s. We are going to 3-bet to 70. As you know, my MO is to mostly just play 3-bet or fold, specifically when recreational players open. I want to isolate, play a pot heads up in position. So we 3-bet here. We are going to get heads up in position, and we go to a flop, Jack 9 deuce. What do you know? And when it checks over to us here, here's why I don't want to c-bet using that medium size. I want to choose a size here on the flop that is going to entice our opponents to both raise off their strong stuff and still call with their weak stuff. If we go small here, our opponent is probably going to float one time with a hand like pocket 8s with a spade or pocket 6s with a spade. And also, if our opponent does wake up with a very strong hand here, like Jack 9 of hearts or pocket deuces, and we bet small, they're going to put in more money for us. So it's just like if we bet large. If we choose that in-between size here, well, now they may start just flatting with some of their strong hands, and they may start folding some of their weak hands. And if we go large here, sure, we get that big bet from Jack 9 or pocket deuces, but then they're just always going to fold hands that we have essentially drawing dead. So as you can see here, by going small and forcing them to raise off their strong stuff and call with their weak stuff, we get the most value from their entire range here, which is why choosing that pretty small size on the flop is going to be very, very good. I would go somewhere between 30% to 40% pot to get that desired result. All right, one more example here. This time we open on the button and the villain is going to call. Villain checks it over to us. And in the last example, I said, I want to choose a size where they raise off their strong stuff and call with their weak stuff. On this flop, that may not be possible, right? Because even if we choose a small size here, well, if our opponent has a hand like ace deuce suited or pocket deuces, the board is so static and so dry that they may just call with their strong stuff even if we choose a small size. Also, if we choose a small size here, well, is our opponent really calling with a hand like pocket 6s or pocket 4s on an ace high board with no draws? Probably not, because what hand do your opponents put you on when you open and then you c-bet? They put you on a lot of ace X, and opponents in general are going to float way less on these ace high boards with marginal hands than they will on a jack high board. By betting small here, we do not entice our opponent to raise off their strong stuff and call with their weak stuff. So the small size is no good. The medium size is also not great here for the same reason the small size is not great, but what about large? Well, what happens if we go very large on this board? Well, if our opponent does have an ace, they're not folding. Even if we overbet here, they're not folding to 1-bet. So on this type of board where the board is very static and the board is very dry, I may integrate an overbet or check strategy and use that very large size where our opponent checks over to us. I am going 1.5x pot or check back on this board, and with middle set, I would want to choose that big overbet size, targeting ace X that just isn't folding for any size here. All right, so we talked about the flop, when we want to use small sizes, when we want to use very big sizes. Let's jump into turns now. And in this hand, we're going to open up the button with 7-6 of diamonds, and the villain is going to call in the big blind. Flop comes Jack 9 deuce. And they are going to check it over to us. Once again, we're going to choose this small size on the flop where they raise off their strong stuff and call with their weak stuff. And again, in single raise pots, it's more about the absolute size of the bet than the relative size. Now, you notice in a 3-bet pot, I use the 1/3 pot size bet. In a single raise pot, I feel like you can get away with going just a little bit bigger. And right here, $20 would still be classified as a small bet for the game. So we're going to go $20, force them to raise off their strong stuff, call with their weak stuff. Our opponent is going to call. We're going to go to a turn, which is a blank. Is our opponent capped? I simply mean, does our opponent have very strong hands here on the turn? And let me answer for you, no. They don't. Remember, when we choose the small size on the flop, our opponent's gonna raise off hands like Jack 9 of hearts or pocket deuces or pocket nines. Getting to this turn, the best hand they can have is a hand like Ace Jack. When they get to the turn and they are capped, I generally like to choose a very, very large size. Why? Because if we choose a small size, they're not going to be putting in more money for us regardless. On this turn, I like to choose a very, very large size with both our bluffs, like 7-6 of diamonds, and with our value, like hands like pocket nines. You may be wondering, well, why do you want to choose this large size? If our opponent has a hand like Ace Jack, they are not folding. If our opponent has a hand like Ace 5 of spades, they are not folding. And a lot of these hands that are going to call a very big bet on the turn are going to be put in a quandary on the river. If we have 7-6 of diamonds here, we can get a lot of hands like Ace 3 of spades or Queen Jack that are going to call on the turn, and then we put in the big boy overbet on the river and we get those hands to fold. So we get more value on the turn by putting in this big bet with our bluffs, because then we get a lot of their range to fold on the river. We want to pile in as much money as possible, and then our bluffs want to get them to fold on the river. Obviously, our value wants to get them to call on the river. So on the turn, when our opponent is capped, I would be choosing a very, very large overbet size. All right, guys, real quick. We're doing one last boot camp in September, and bad news, it's sold out. There's a bunch of you who still wanted a seat, so here's what we're doing. We are opening a second group for September, 10 people max. The first one sold out in 4 days. The second one will sell out. We only have capacity for 2 groups. We are not opening a third group. So if you've ever wanted to do a Hungry Horse Poker Bootcamp, September is your last chance. Sign up today. Thank you, guys. We will see you there. All right, so we walked through a turn scenario where our opponents are capped, but what about when they are not capped? So let me show you. We open it up on the button with Ace 6 of spades here. Our opponent calls in the big blind, Jack 9 deuce. What do you know? They check it over. We choose a small size on the flop. We're gonna raise off their strong stuff, call with their weak stuff. They call. Now the turn is a 4 of spades. On this turn, I would ask, is our opponent capped? And the answer here is no, because our opponent on this turn can have quite a lot of flushes. Well, if we choose the large size here, of course, our opponent's going to call or maybe even raise with their flushes, but they're going to fold almost everything else. Why? Because our opponent doesn't have 2 pair or sets that are going to be doing a lot of calling on this turn. Those hands would mostly raise off on the flop. Even if our opponent has a hand like Queen Jack here, if that hand doesn't have a spade, well, that hand is probably folding here on the turn if we bet large. Even if they do have a spade, that hand may fold if we bet large. Same with King Jack, same with Ace Jack, same with their open and straight draws. A lot of these hands, if we pile in money on this turn, are just going to be folding. Same thing if we choose the medium size here. Doesn't accomplish them raising off their strong stuff like the small size does, and doesn't maximize value like the big size does. So this is why the medium size is usually really, really poor. If we go small here, well, our opponent's going to continue with a bunch of hands that we have drawing dead. Queen 10 of clubs or Queen Jack with the Queen of spades. And our opponent is also going to raise and put in more money for us when we have them coolered here on this turn. So if our opponent does have a hand like Queen 8 of spades or something like that, when we go small on this turn, they are going to be incentivized to put in more money for us. So by going small on this turn, when our opponent is not capped, they once again are going to raise off their strong stuff and call with their weak stuff, which is why the small size on the turn when our opponent is not capped is so good. Let's say on this turn that we do decide to bet small and our opponent check calls once again. Let's say we get to this river with 7-6 of diamonds, right? Let's say we bet small on the flop, we bet small on the turn to force our opponents to raise off their strong stuff, raise off their flushes, and now we get to this river, we have 7-6 of diamonds. Well, what is the best hand our opponent can have? Probably a hand like Ace Jack or King Jack, right? And when the flush comes in, do we really think our opponent is hanging on with a hand like King Jack here if we lay down the big boy hammer? No. And the reason we can get away with laying down this big boy overbet bluff on the river is because our opponent, remember, would raise off a lot of their strong stuff on the flop. They would raise off pocket nines, Jack 9, pocket deuces, so they don't have those hands. And because we went small on the turn when the flush came in, well, our opponent would raise off a lot of their flushes as well. So when we get here with a bluff, this is a very, very, very good place to go with that huge size here. Maybe bet $300, $350 to get our opponent to fold Ace Jack, King Jack, Queen Jack. One of my favorite lines in poker to bluff is when our opponents check call when the flush comes in on the turn and we bet small. Well, that just means they are ripe for bluffing on the river. Now, if we do get here with a hand like Ace 6 of spades, because our bluff wants to go so big, you may be thinking, well, shouldn't we be balanced here? No. There's no reason to be balanced against people who can't even spell balanced. And if the best hand our opponent has getting to this river is a hand like ace jack, and we have ace six of spades, well, we want ace jack to call. So this may be a time to use a much smaller sizing on this river. And you may be thinking, well, Mark, isn't a smaller size like a medium size? Shouldn't we be going like half pot here or 2/3 pot or something like that? No, probably not. If our opponent has ace jack and we have a bluff, we're probably going like 2x pot or $300 here on this river to get ace jack to fold, which means to me, we can probably get even just a tad bit greedier with ace six of spades. I think going $60 or $70 is just leaving a bunch of value on the table. I would probably go somewhere near pot, maybe 120, 130. If our opponent's a little sticky, maybe even 150. We're inching towards that medium size. But again, we see that the big size on this river is going to be used with our bluff, so we want to size down a little bit with our value. So in that last hand, we were going very, very big with our bluffs and relatively small with our value on the river, and by small, I mean pot. So let me show you an example where the inverse is true, where we may want to go very, very big with our value and very, very small with our bluffs. Villain is going to open from the cutoff. We're going to 3-bet on the button with pocket kings, and he is going to call. We go to a flop 9-4 deuce, again in 3-bet pots. We want to choose a size where they raise off the strong stuff, call with the weak stuff, so usually going to be very small. We go small here on the flop. Our opponent calls. We go to a turn, which is a king, and now when our opponent checks over, again, this would be a spot here where I would probably choose a smaller size. What is most of our opponent's range here after calling on the flop? It's going to be some wheel draws, 5-6 suited, some 9x, pocket 10s, pocket jacks, pocket queens, hands like that. So if we start blasting on this turn, a lot of that range is just going to fold. So on this turn, once again, I would go relatively small. And again, this entices our opponent. If they did trap with a hand like pocket 9s or pocket 4s or something like that on the flop, we give them another chance to raise off here, and our opponent is going to call. We're going to the river, which is an ace. Now our opponent checks over to us. Our opponent can have quite a few strong hands here. Ace 9 suited. They could have ace king here that would theoretically play this way. Since our opponent can have a ton of 2-pair getting to the river, and our opponent's probably going to fold a hand like 10-9 suited or pocket jacks or pocket queens if we even breathe on this pot, this seems like a pretty good situation to just target their 2-pair here when we have a set of kings, because the 2-pair is probably never folding to the huge size. If we use the medium size on this river, that would be a disaster. In this situation with our value, we would want to go very, very big, 2x pot all in. So let's say we got to this river with a hand like 5-6 suited, right? We had a gut shot, we bricked, and we didn't get there. What size should we bet on this river with 5-6 suited? The medium size doesn't accomplish all that much here, because if we choose the medium size, well, the 2-pair is snapping us off, the ace 5 suited is snapping us off, and the pocket 10s and pocket jacks would fold to a much smaller size. We could probably just go 25% pot here, 30% pot on this river, get all of those hands to fold, and lose the minimum when we are up against a hand like 2-pair or ace 5 suited. I promise you 2 exceptions where the medium size can be okay, so let me show you those examples right now. So this would be the first exception when our value wants to go huge or very, very small. Our bluffs can go medium. We've got 7-6 of diamonds, open it up on the button, villain calls in the big blind, going to a flop. We are going to go half pot here on the flop. They call, going to a turn. Our villain is capped here on the turn, so we are going to choose the very big boy overbet size. They are going to call again. Now the river is an ace and they check it over. I always like to frame it first. What would we do here with value? Well, if we had a hand like pocket 9s here, it seems like a pretty good place to put all the money in. Our opponent on this river makes a ton of 2-pair. Ace jack. All of their ace jack combos now have 2-pair. Ace deuce of spades, ace 4 of spades. So our opponent has a ton of 2-pair, and I don't think 2-pair is folding for any size. So if we had a hand like pocket 9s or pocket deuces here, I would almost always jam this river for value, targeting our opponent's 2-pair. Now, with our bluff here, this is one of the few rare exceptions where it's pretty good to use that medium size. Our goal here should be to get hands like queen jack, king jack, jack 10 to fold. And if we choose a medium size when the ace comes on the river, I think we can accomplish that a whole hell of a lot. Our opponent's not going to feel comfortable calling a $250, $300 size bet. Our value size should be very, very big, all in. Our bluff size on this river should be somewhere in between, somewhere in the middle. We're trying to get queen jack, king jack to fold. An alternative value size for us, if we did get here with a hand like ace 6 of spades that banked an ace on the river, we may just be able to choose a very, very small size on this river, trying to get looked up by queen jack or king jack. Maybe we would bet 100 or 125 on this river to ensure that king jack or queen jack calls. All right, one more example for you of when the medium size can be okay. The final exception, we open up 7-6 diamonds on the button. Once again, jack 9 deuce, half pot, they call, turn is a blank. We are going to choose the big boy overbet size, they call again. Now the river is a blank. Let's talk about our size on this river if we were going to bluff. Option number 1 is to choose the big boy bazooka overbet size and jam all in for $810. Why? Because our opponent just doesn't have very many strong hands getting to this river. Usually the best hand they're gonna have, hand like ace jack, king jack, queen jack. And if we think we can get the jack X to fold for over 2x pot, I would just greatly favor jamming. But let's say you're playing against Mr. Sticky Icky Icky. You may think, should I give up? No. An alternative size would just be very, very small. Maybe quarter pot or 20% pot, because we can just get hands like queen 10 or ace high flush draws or king queen to fold on this river. We can either go very, very large or very, very small. With pocket kings here, a nice choice could be somewhere in between. So this would be the second exception here. When our bluffs want to go very large or very small, sometimes our value wants to go medium. With pocket kings, I would be targeting hands like ace jack, king jack, queen jack, and I would choose the size that those hands would call. Medium is all relative, because I don't think ace jack is folding for $400, $450, maybe even $500 on this river. So medium may still be an overbet, but it's also a size that is in between our bluff sizes, which are either huge or small. So this would be the second exception. When our bluffs want to go huge or small, our value generally wants to go medium. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video on why to stop using the middling size. Hopefully this skyrockets your win rate and turns you into the biggest boy possible. Thank you guys, and have a gentle day.